First of all, social media has opened up. Everyone is a journalist today, or potentially a journalist.
Being a female journalist, how do you think it has influenced your writing? Or maybe even how did the public maybe perceive that?
I also talked to many of Vikram Sarabhai's former students who then worked alongside with him.
What kind of books do you think really impacted you as someone who is getting into this field?
Hello, ma'am. It's been quite a gloomy weather here in Bangalore today, but it's nice to be in a setting like this. And I'm Kalyani.
I'm Glenn.
Hello.
Hello, ma'am. Yeah, once again. So we are the hosts for today's podcast. But also it's quite exciting to have you here because we have had our workshop with you.
That's right.
This entire week. So it's adding on to another sort of experience for us. And it's wonderful to have you here with us today. I think we'll start with the questions.
Yes, but I just wanted to say how nice it is to be interviewed by my students, my temporary students.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for that, actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, welcome, ma'am. So you actually witnessed journalism, and you've been in the trenches, you've seen it up close, is what I'd like to say. So what are kind of the broad changes you witnessed from the time you started out as a journalist in crime reporting to what journalism is right now? Like, is it sensationalism, something that strikes you a lot?
Right. So I didn't start out as a crime reporter. I just happened to get into covering crime. But I also covered politics, and I wrote about the media, and I wrote about society. So I did a kind of range of things. So for me, because I started out in a very serious features magazine, the most sort of apparent change, which is not probably for everyone, is the death of the features magazine. You did sort of see other sort of new magazines come out a few years later. But I think that was at that point the most visible shift because of competition from television. So, you see technology. I have seen when I started out, I am a print journalist primarily. And I saw television come in. I saw the electronic media come, cable TV, the VCR, satellite television. And I've seen the impact of all these. And of course, then the growth, because of these new technologies, a range of channels, and then, of course, the internet and the rise of OTT. So technology is, of course, the big story of our times. And because of that, you have new forms. But what I have also seen, I think, is that this is a period of liberalization. So you also saw the infusion of funds, advertising, the growth of advertising for the media. And I mean, if the figures are astronomical, the kind of growth from, let's say, the 1980s when I started to, sort of decade by decade, what was happening. And that, I think, has been very, very significant in changing the kind of media content, because there was a lot of, competition, and competition led to that sensationalism that you referred to, and also the kind of formats that you saw. For instance, right now, I think if you talk about politics or how the television covers politics, then you see it's always in a kind of room with people talking to each other, which seems a kind of, certainly would not have been the way it was covered earlier. There would have been investigation, there would have been, stories being done on political processes or events. But now it's sort of just this kind of debates on television. So many, many changes.
Yeah, and adding on to that, would you say how the alternative media, for example, social media, has kind of influenced this landscape as well? How do you think it would have maybe the influences, or if let's say if alternative media is the new media that is trying to kind of uncover the truth?
Oh,
If-
I see.
yeah.
So you're saying more traditional forms of journalism in alternative media.
yeah.
I think that what has happened is, yes, of course, because of the internet and because of social media, you have the possibility of, first of all, social media has opened up. Everyone is a journalist today, or potentially a journalist. So that, of course, is there. It's changed the nature of what used to, because there was a kind of filter. That filter has been taken away, and everyone can address the public, so to speak, directly. Of course, depending on how many people you can reach. But the internet, of course, has made possible the entry of low cost sort of media options, and also the kind of work that they can do and tend to do is definitely more the older form of journalism. I don't even know how to say older form, because there's either journalism or not, and they
Sure.
actually do journalism. I think what much of 90% of the media is, not 90%, maybe I'm exaggerating, but I think a huge chunk of media is not, what they're doing is not journalism, it's more entertainment.
That's quite interesting, actually. I think I remember once someone saying that they're not competing with journalists, they're competing with Netflix or entertainment.
That's true.
It just
I think,
strikes
yes.
a chord. But I think from journalism, you have also been an author. You have written 4 books and all, right?
Right.
And research, I'm assuming, has been an integral part since your journalism days,
Yes.
because of integrity and all of the other things. So, what kind of research goes into this thing? Because me and Kalyani, we were reading your book, Ahmedabad, and the portrayal is so visceral. Like, I can actually feel it, like something that I could probably read in a fiction book.
Yeah.
But what kind of research goes, especially at a place which has such a rich socio-political, historical context, which has seen displacement, communal strife? What kind of sensitivity is required when you're doing research, especially for something so big, you can say, on a big scale?
Yeah. So I don't come from Ahmedabad, and a lot of people now just assume I do. So I assume that is in some ways a compliment to the fact that it seemed like an insider's view. But I think what happened was with Ahmedabad, I went there as a reporter, a writer in 1985. And then I kind of found that city so fascinating. I'd gone there to cover an episode of very big episode of caste and communal violence, so the memory of that stayed with me. I did a lot of work at that time over there, in the sense interviewing people. It was a large story. I did 3,000 words, I think. And so when it came into the news in a much more explosive way in more recent times, I was already there doing another book, Vikram Sarabhai. I was researching that, and that's when all these sort of political events happened. The mass violence, and then of course Narendra Modi, who went from chief minister to becoming prime minister, and I could see that it was a politically significant. The city, there was a political significance at that point, and I happened to already be visiting it. So I think it helped that I had a certain level of familiarity with the city. And I think what was precious was the fact that I was not an insider totally. I was an outsider who was, taking the Shatabdi periodically from Mumbai, early morning train to go to Ahmedabad, and then returning after a few days. But so I was both in and out. I knew the language, of course. I'm a Gujarati and I speak Gujarati. Though my family, we come from Mumbai. So there's a very large population of Gujaratis in Mumbai. But, I do know the lifestyle and the culture. So I guess that familiarity was one part of it. But two, I also knew the history of the city quite well. And so very instinctively, I kind of seemed to know where to go for research. And I trusted, I would sort of decide, okay, I'm going to spend a lot of time in the old city. There's a place called Khadia, which is, there's sort of a lot of, it's politically quite volatile. And so I spent a lot of time there. And I can't say that I had an exact idea what I was doing there. But when you kind of have a background understanding, then, you follow your hunch, and so that's how the picture of the city developed.
Yeah, and now that you've spoken about the city itself, since in the book Vikram Sarabhai Life, he's also from Ahmedabad. So, as you said, you've done a lot of research, maybe parallelly alongside for that book too. But what about the scientific research that was required of you to do for that book? Because it is covering the space program and all the endeavors that Vikram Sarabhai was part of. So, and how much of that would you have included in the book itself?
Right. So I must say that was a bit of a challenge because I don't have a science background. Though, some point in my childhood, I think I wanted to be a physicist. So I think I satisfied that urge slightly here. I What I did with Vikram Sarabhai, I relied on people's writings on the space program. It was a very good book by one very good book by Gopal Raj, which was very useful because he had a very nicely written history of the space program. But then I did a lot of interviews. I also talked to many of Vikram Sarabhai's former students who then worked alongside with him, both in in the physical research laboratory, which he started as scientists, and in the space program. So they kind of gave me an insight into the workings of the laboratory, what they were trying to do. I read then, of course, Sarabhai's PhD thesis, and then I read a lot of background stuff because I had to situate what he was interested in, his area of research, which was into cosmic rays, into the larger kind of research going on at that time in cosmic rays. So it was a little difficult, but I think once I started reading it, it all started making sense. I could understand, even though I'm not a scientist, I could understand what interested him and what the other scientists were doing at the time. I just took care to write it as simply as I could. And for that, I think I talked to a lot of scientists trying to say, please explain to me. It's not easy to make scientists talk in layperson's terms, but I think that was a little bit of a challenge for me to make it comprehensible.
And adding on to the journalism question, since you have written about cities, technology, and maybe even power also in certain ways, how do you think being a female journalist, how do you think it has influenced your writing? Or maybe even how did the public maybe perceive that? If you could speak on that, yeah.
Being a woman journalist,
Yeah,
and a
yeah.
woman writer.
Or maybe the challenges.
Yeah. I mean, of course, there are challenges and it's different, but there are also positives. I think people talk easier. I think people tend to feel at ease with you. But of course, you're also cut out of the kind of buddyship that happens between a politician and a journalist. I don't, I think that they balance out the negatives and the positives. I mean, I remember landing up once in Bhopal, and I wanted to do a story on something where I had to interview the chief minister. And I just walked. I was told that he was giving a press conference, so I just walked into the room, and just the fact that I've come from outside, from another place, I'm an unfamiliar person, and I think I'm a woman. I think I just found it easier to get an interview with him. It might have been a little harder had I been maybe a male. I'm not sure. But I think the unfamiliarity and the oddness, because though, women are really, really, they've done very well in journalism always, certainly since the 80s, the 1980s. But still, they tended to outnumber women in smaller towns. So I think that was one. I feel that being a woman allows me to see things in unconventional terms. There are, of course, male journalists who do, but I feel that I tend to see, like if I look at political processes, then I'm also looking at the social, and I think that makes me more astute because I feel that for instance, if I'm writing about politics today, I just don't write it the way I used to earlier, simply because I've seen the kind of social change that has happened over the last 25, 30 years. I've seen the impact of the media on politics. So I bring all those things into my understanding of politics. While I think that a conventional sort of most political analysts who've been doing it for a long time um, tend to see it in the narrow terms of elections, and they don't bring in these kind of influences. So I feel that's what benefits me and helps my work.
And maybe a sort of sensitivity also.
Perhaps.
Right, yeah.
Perhaps. I don't want to say, male journalists are not sensitive.
I don't mean that either.
Yeah. But I think that, I guess, women just do. They're used to talking, right? And having people talk to them and listening. So I think, yeah, probably that all does come into my work.
Basically, like, what kind of books have had an impact on you? Like, when you're starting out as a writer and all, you're, of course, reading and everything. So what kind of books do you think really impacted you as someone who is getting into this field?
As a writer, a writer of books?
Maybe professionally also. Both ways you can speak on both terms. Yeah.
So I think as a journalist, there were just, I used to read, even before I became a journalist, it was a post-emergency time. And so there was a lot of investigative reporting going on. So I was just very exhilarated. It was almost like, it was a time, very exciting time to want to be a journalist and then to actually become one. So, Arun Shourie had done his exposés at that time. And that this was all very new, that kind of, there was a lot of irreverence in the writing and a lot of not caring about, like, speaking truth to power. So I think M.J. Akbar was a very young journalist at that time. These were the kind of, I'm thinking there were people who wrote for the Indian Express at that time, wrote these very kind of explosive stories. There was a Kamla case where someone, actually went out and bought a woman to prove, to kind of give evidence that women were being bought and sold in a certain place. And so, these are all new approaches to doing journalism in a country that was actually used to just reporting what politicians said, without actually going behind the scenes. So I think at that time I was very excited by that kind of writing. But I then was introduced to this form of writing, American form of journalism called New Journalism, which was more literary. And so these were writers like Gay Talese and Truman Capote. For a while, I think I loved Truman Capote's writing. So again, for me, I think I'm a very political writer, but I write about many things. I see the political aspect of many things. So, which is what Capote actually does. For instance, he covered this train journey that was taking this first American musical to Russia. And that was a very political story, but the way he did it was just to bring alive these characters traveling on a train. So, that fascinated me.
And anything that you read for yourself, maybe,
Oh, yeah.
or like currently that was something that you're reading right now. Only if you can remember anything.
Yeah, off the cuff I can't, but I actually just, there's some writers I really enjoy now. Is David Mitchell is one. There are like so many contemporary writers that I really enjoy reading, but this is how it is. It never comes to mind.
Right, I can understand.
But I read a recent book by Naomi Klein. I enjoy Naomi Klein's work, though I just because, and that's what I like. I like the offbeat. And her recent book is quite an offbeat book about the doppelganger, like two people called Naomi and... so I like an offbeat take on important issues.
So would you consider yourself, since you write nonfiction a lot, do you also gravitate towards the fictional like stories or novels?
In reading? Or
in
writing?
Reading. Yeah, in reading.
I read everything.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, by everything, I mean all kinds of books, because nowadays I'm just into books. I don't read the media as much as I used to. So, but I read all kinds of books. But okay, but increasingly, like I don't like crass writing.
Okay.
I get impatient. I could
Yeah.
earlier. I used to like all kinds, really very popular as well. But now I find I think I know I can't read so much. So you kind of prioritize.
Yeah. And when it comes to crass writing, I do have to ask you this one question about just AI in general, just as an advice question for readers who, like us, who are just starting out. Maybe it would have been different for you back then, your journey of starting to write. And since AI has come, crass writing, brain rot, and all that sort of writing has come, what would your advice be to, maybe is it similar to how it was when you started out, or would you say something different now for writers who are starting out now?
I think so. Being in a flood, being in an environment where you are surrounded by very quick, and it is a little. You do have to. I think one should be aware that to transcend it, or at least try. What it's done, I think AI has made easier is the fact that information comes so fast. I think it's like the calculator of my times. You know, when the calculator came, or the computer, oh, we're going to lose these writing skills, we are going to lose mathematical skills, and it does happen. And that losing of processes, I do think, is a little sad. But maybe what one has to do is use all this, but try and read good writing that is that touches you, that's well crafted and literary, you know.
That's a good answer, actually, because a lot of us are struggling to, as
I can
writers,
imagine.
trying to write with AI. Yeah.
So that is like we're trying to come up with so many things, but you don't know where to go, what
Right.
thing to follow,
Yeah.
or where can I see something.
Maybe you can ask AI what are the good writers to read, you know.
You should not see my ChatGPT history. But yeah, that is there. But from that also, I want to pivot slightly also towards the I would say advice. Like, what is some of the advice that you got from maybe colleagues, mentors, or just friends in general in your writing journey overall, or some anecdotes that stick with you? Like, this is something that really impacted me throughout the journey.
Yeah, I think I'm a very self-taught person, and I enjoy that. Like, I enjoy grappling with challenges myself, but I've always taken help from people in terms of. So you know what happens is this chance, like a friend who introduced me to new journalism. I do remember that. I do remember the first time I heard about it, and then went and started sort of discovering these writers. So as I don't know, had I not had that conversation at that moment, whether or when I would have discovered it. And so I'm very grateful to that kind of chance conversation about it. You know, I think what I've learned from writers is by reading and then kind of emulating. So a lot of writers who structure well, or who kind of bring color to their work in just brilliant ways. So I think one writer who I admire a lot, who's quite controversial though, is V.S. Naipaul. And I think he's quite unique in the way his work is very subjective. He always travels. He's gone to a new place and he's writing about it, and but it's all through him, you know. And you can say that could get very narcissistic or very self-indulgent, but it's not. There is such wisdom. And I know he's a very controversial writer and people might not like his views, and I might agree with that sometimes, but I think just him as an artist, and as a man of so completely committed to the literary life, I find that quite inspiring.
That's really great.
Yeah, I wouldn't have expected VS now.
Is it?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was a great conversation to have with you. I think we got a few insights, especially about the advice and what you felt, how things were back then and how things have changed now. And it's quite different now, and it's a struggle for us writers as well now. But we are trying to figure out our ways to get into the maybe the publishing industry or whatever we are trying to do on our own.
Yeah.
So it's good to have you even as a teacher
Thank
in
you.
class to give us some push, some advice. So yeah, thank you so much for that.
Yeah, well, I think it's a lovely time when you can all tell your stories.
Right,
So thank you so much.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
I've
much.
thank you,
enjoyed
ma'am.
being with you these
Yeah.
last few days.